Hi there, it's Kevin with RogueDeckBuilder.com here at this week's episode of the FNM Spotlight. This week is going to be back to Modern. We rotate every week, and I am really sick and tired of the hyper-aggressive decks and the combo decks, so I'm going to go back to an oldie but a goodie, which is more of like this budget. I guess this isn't quite budget because I'm using, well, non-Liliana. I do not own any Liliana the Veils, nor do I ever plan to own any Liliana the Veils, as they're way above my price range that I'm willing to spend on a card at 115 bucks a piece. But this is going to be an 8-rack. I've made a few changes to the 8-rack version. Let me just talk about what 8-rack is and what decks it's good against. 8-rack is very, very good against combo-based decks and hyper-aggressive decks because of the amount of early removal you run. And then it stabilizes and then has the win conditions through the racks, which we call Shrieking Affliction. And also, let's pull up a display panel for you here. Shrieking Affliction, as well as the rack, which Shrieking Affliction states that at the beginning of each opponent's upkeep, if that player has one or fewer cards, they lose 3 life. And the rack does damage at the beginning of each chosen player's upkeep. The rack deals X damage to that player, where X is 3 minus the number of cards in their hand. So they both have some advantages. Like Shrieking Affliction, they have 1 or 0, then it does the full 3 damage. The rack, if they have 2, it does 1 damage. 1, it does 2 damage, and 0 does 3 damage. So they're very, very similar. The whole object is to get them down to 1 or 0, and then start having these do damage each turn. Now, the reason why that I like to splash red in 8-rack is because of Kolaghan's Command. I think it's one of the strongest cards in Modern. It has just huge advantage, and it lets us get more advantage out of a card called Gatekeeper of Malakir. Gatekeeper of Malakir, I think, is the perfect addition to an 8-rack type strategy because this guy sticks around and then can get in there for 2 damage per turn. What you do is you end up casting this just for 3, and when it enters the battlefield, if it was kicked, target player sacks a creature. So third turn, you've already made them discard cards with like Wrench Mind or Raven's Crime, or killed something off with a Terminate or Lightning Bolt. Then third turn, they might have something else they played on their turn, and then you Gatekeeper it and kill it. So it's kind of like our budget version of Liliana. Liliana, of course, is 3 mana that can make them sack a creature and leaves back a Planeswalker that then makes discard cards. Gatekeeper kind of just switches up the gears and starts getting in for a little bit of damage, or can be used as a blocker. And it does synergize quite well with Kolaghan's Command because it gives us an actual return target creature from your graveyard to hand clause from Kolaghan's Command, which you wouldn't otherwise have. So I'm going to be running a lot of removal for Lightning Bolts because that's another reason why I like red, because if you're running the mono black version, these are usually Disfigures or Grasp of Darkness or Dismembers or just something that can't do damage to the face. So a lot of times, like, this deck can be quicker than the traditional 8-rack of actually finishing off the game. If you can unload their hand and then top deck Lightning Bolts and they're really close, then you can do the damage. Usually, though, you've controlled them out, but Lightning Bolt is just superior to Disfigure. It basically, unless it's got Indestructible or prevents damage somehow, that's the only thing that Disfigure would be better than Lightning Bolt. The Bolt can kill anything with 3 toughness. Disfigure can only do with 2 toughness. So I think that it's just superior if we're already in red to be using the Lightning Bolt. And then Terminate is the premier removal. This can take care of anything. I like this better than like they use Destroy Target Non-Vampire or Victim of Night in a lot of 8-rack decks. They've also been used in known to be used like Ultimate Price or Doomblade or a few other cards like Go for the Throat. And I think Terminate just is so much better than all of them because it doesn't have any clauses, still instant speed, and they cannot be regenerated, which actually does come into effect against Affinity sometimes when they're using like Welding Jars. You never know. Like I've actually used the cannot regenerate ability before in Modern. So then we go on to the discard spells. The discard spells, I've kind of switched this up. I like using all of these ones and then the Wrench Mind as just the 2 drop. So the first one, one of the best cards is Funeral Charm. Why it's so good is its instant speed. So you instantly make them discard a card. So you've got them down to 0 cards. Now, one of the worst cases for 8-rack is the top deck. And if they top deck their answer and for whatever reason could kill off maybe the racks or Shrieking Afflictions or put out like a card that is problematic, this is bad. So Funeral Charms you wait till late game to use as instant speed. The Kolaghan's Command is also instant speed discard. And then we have one other instant speed discard, which is Necrogen Spellbomb. Necrogen Spellbomb is a new addition to this deck. I really, really, really like it, as if we have our opponent down to no cards and we actually don't want to make them discard cards, like if we're not afraid of top decks, we can actually use Necrogen Spellbomb just to cycle. So that's the reason why I like this card. Just 1 mana, sack it, draw a card. That's fine. If we'd rather have that than making them discard a card, that's always an option. And it's that instant speed discard is huge. And I can't say that enough. You're going to be controlling the board, so getting their cards out of their hand due to Lightning Bolts, Terminates, Kolaghan's Command. Hopefully Kolaghan's Command can 2 for 1. And then late game, Necrogen Spellbomb and Funeral Charm can make those top decks go away. Another card that is extremely good in this deck is Raven's Crime. Target player discards a card, retrace. So it's going to, late game, once you have your 3 lands out, because there's no point to having more than 3 lands in this deck, you can start ditching all of your lands to Raven's Crime. And that basically just allows you the long game. Wrench Mind is the best spell in here because it's kind of like our Hymn to Torak. It's card advantage because target player discards 2 cards unless they discard an artifact. So it's basically a 2 for 1. Again, getting their hand down. First turn you want to do like a Raven's Crime. Second turn you're going to do a Wrench Mind. They've already discarded 3 cards. You can start controlling the board and eventually get them down to no cards. The sideboard is really open. There's a lot of things you can do. I think there's a lot of like Living End. My local metagame has some ways to interact with graveyards, so I'm going to run Leyline of the Void, Nihil Spellbombs, and Surgical Extractions. I'm also going to run Infinite Obliteration in Slaughter games because we do have, I know for a fact there's going to be a person playing Elves, which if you can name with Infinite Obliteration Azuri, then basically you're going to wipe away all of their Azuris, and it's going to be hard for them to have a win condition, and you can actually get this Infinite Obliteration off before they can go like the Collected Company or the Court of Calling. So Infinite Obliteration is also very good against Abzan and Company, or Malarian Company, whatever you want to call it. And it's very, very good against some decks you wouldn't even expect it to be good against. Like, it's so good versus Ad Nauseam, which is another deck that I know one of our players plays pretty religiously. So against Ad Nauseam, you just name the Spirit Guide, Seeming Spirit Guide, and then it's very hard for them to go off on Ad Nauseam. They have to have 3 more or 4 more mana sources a lot of time on the board. So instead of turn 4, then it's going to be turn like 7 before they can really go off. And then by that time, we've eaten their hand alive. And of course, Slaughter Games is also good versus Ad Nauseam because you can either name the Ad Nauseam. Usually you do want to name Ad Nauseam, but they can still win through Spoils of Vault. But at least you can name, if you know they only run 1 win condition, you can name their Lightning Storm. Or I know a lot of them use like Laboratory Maniacs, so yeah, that's always an issue with that. So sometimes I just like to Slaughter Games, same thing, just Slaughter Games the Seeming Spirit Guide, and it makes it a lot harder for them to win. The Leyline of Void is going to, of course, any sort of flashback, unearth, graveyard-based strategies, Leyline's going to take care of it. It doesn't affect your own graveyard, which is nice. But I think Nihil Spellbomb is better just because of the card advantage. I thought about this versus the Relic of Progenitus, but I don't like exiling my own Raven's Crimes. That sometimes is not a feeling you want to have. So I'm giving Nihil Spellbomb the nod over Relic of Progenitus. Not quite sure that's the right play or not. And then the 3 surgical extractions in this deck are very good because you can go like first turn Raven's Crime. If they happen to discard a card you want them to discard, and you can surgically extract it. The thing about like this deck, why I don't like surgical extraction or infinite obliteration as much, is we don't have like a Thoughtseize or Inquisition in the deck, so you can't like just first turn look at their hand and then decide what's in their hand and get value out of infinite obliteration or surgical extraction. It might be something I'll look into, maybe sideboarding a few Inquisitions or something like that. People always ask me why I don't run Inquisitions, because this deck doesn't care. You just want to get cards out of their hand for the Rack and Shrieking Affliction, so you usually want discards with an upside, and whether that be instant speed through Funeral Charm, a recursion discard card, one that can actually draw you a card, or one that gets 2, they usually get the nod over Thoughtseize and Inquisition. But they're definitely an option, especially for the Infinite Obliteration, to kind of take a peek at your opponent's hand, and it might actually... yeah, it might actually be worth it just to chuck, like, instead of like Blightnings or something, chuck a few of like the look at target player's hand, discard a card type cards. So then we have 2 Pyroclasms. Those are good versus anything that tries to flood the board. Goblins, Elves, Merfolk, it's actually pretty decent against. Another Terminate against problematic cards. This is good against Eldrazi right now. 8-Rack's pretty bad against Eldrazi, actually, because Eldrazi is the deck that is really good against top decking, and then just late game their Eye of Ugins can just get them so much advantage. So not really liking this versus Eldrazi. To my knowledge, no one runs Eldrazi at my local game store. Then we have the 2 Dragon's Claws. This is in here for the burn, and then 2 Blightnings. I bring Blightning against those more mid-range base decks, and it's another way to get 2 more cards out of their hand and 3 damage. So it's kind of like my 5th and 6th Wrench Mines that you can use on turn 3. This is kind of the weak spot in the deck, though. I'm not quite sure I like Blightning. This could be where I need to add like another Dragon's Claw, or possibly add in. I know I might adjust. If I see certain players and I know are running burn, yeah, I'm going to throw 2 more Dragon's Claws in the sideboard over Blightnings, and maybe even put like a sun Droplet, which is really good against any sort of damage-based deck as well. And Sun Droplet is basically whenever you're dealt damage, put 2 charge counters on it at the beginning of your upkeep, and your opponent's upkeep you can remove. So each upkeep can remove a charge counter to gain a life, I believe. Let's just look at it. I think it's just 1 life. So it's basically 2 life per, or 1 life per turn. It's really hard for burn decks to come back from that. So yeah, whenever you dealt damage, put that many charge counters on it, and at the beginning of each upkeep, you may remove a charge counter from Sun Droplet and gain a life. So very good stabilization card. That's the gist of it. I don't know. Maybe I'll chuck in some Inquisitions. We'll have to wait and see, because that's I don't like using cards like Slaughter Games and Infinite Obliteration a lot of times without knowing what's in their hand. I don't like to blindly cast it. What's really good about Infinite Obliteration is, like, you say you're going against Elves and you first turn Thoughtseize them, then you know what's in their hand, and then you can follow up with an Infinite Obliteration and at least get value out of. If you decide not to name something that isn't isn't so backbreaking, like isn't relied completely on the combo, but you still want like an Infinite Obliteration, that's what's really good with Thoughtseize and Inquisition is tearing out their hand, and then maybe they have duplicates in their hand, and Infinite Obliteration can actually get 2 cards out of their hand. So I don't know. We will definitely mess around with that. I might think that Infinite Obliteration is just better than Slaughter Games. A lot of the decks are very creature oriented for their combos, like Tooth and Nail, like Ad Nauseam, and if you can break out those specific creature cards, it's very hard for them to actually win the game. The Amulet of Bloom was a good example of that. You just take out the Primeval Titans. So I think that's pretty much just the gist of it. You have a lot of flex with your sideboard. There's plenty of cards that could go in here. There's Torpor Orbs. There is like cages, Scafdigger's cages. There's plenty of things you can play that can hate out particular decks. Torpor Orb's a really good one against like the company decks. So just always I like to just kind of scout the field, and I always have this what I call my sideboard binder. So before I actually go and submit my deck list, I'll kind of scout the field and try to get a feel of what people are playing, and then I'll have the cards on me that I can hurry to switch in. So never just copy and paste a deck list off the internet. There's usually a lot of these people play, especially if it's like a Pro Tour or a GP, they play a specific list for a specific day, and then it's very fluid, the sideboard especially for interpreting towards other or reacting to other type of archetypes or strategies that might be bigger a week later or even a couple of days later. So just keep that in mind. Never just think that the sideboard is set in stone. Anywho, this has been Kevin with RogueDeckBuilder.com. I'll let you know how this deck goes after we play the FNM. Thanks for watching.